I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 20th September 2022 held electronically via Zoom open at 5:37 p.m. Thanks everyone for dialing in. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed via Zoom, obviously. Okay, attendances and apologies. We've got Councillor Jennings on a leave of absence from the 12th of September through to the 3rd of October inclusive. Councillor Burns, I understand, will be joining us as soon as technology permits. It looks like all councillors and directors or acting directors are accounted for. All staff are going to be relatively well known to everyone in attendance. And I can see that everyone's position is showing up in any case, so we'll probably just get started. Okay, are there any disclosures of interest tonight? Nope. Okay, there's no approved deputations. So that would bring us to announcements by the presiding member. Right, well, look, in case you didn't notice, there was a small fire in the admin building a couple of weeks ago, but from what I can gather, the city's staff have not missed a beat in continuing service delivery for the community. It's been quite remarkable to see the operational exercise that's unfolded and to see everyone relocate and adapt in the circumstances. The thing is, old buildings, new buildings, sometimes small fires start in them. That's life, but it's the way that you respond to these situations, which I think defines an organisation. So well done to our staff, and well done for councillors as well for keeping the communication open. On that note, we're having this briefing by Zoom because the council chambers are going to be out of action for a period as a result of the fire. And we're also having to make alternative arrangements for the next few council meetings. So the September Ordinary Council meeting will be held at the council chambers of the City of Vincent. So my thanks to our CEO, Vincent's CEO, and the Mayor and councillors of Vincent for allowing that to happen. Just by way of explanation, we've taken that approach because the City of Vincent has similar IT and streaming capabilities to ours. So I think it's been a relatively natural discussion between our IT staff and theirs to get ready for next week's meeting. And it was considered desirable that we would also have a meeting in person where possible, because these things lead to better meetings. Whilst at the same time allowing for that streaming in capability for anyone who might not want to travel quite so far to attend a council meeting. So we've made arrangements. We'll be thinking quite long and hard about where we hold the annual electors meeting between now and the end of the year. It's most likely that we'll want to have a venue a little bit closer to Subiaco, but for the purpose of council meetings, I think as long as we've got a council-like layout and we've got video streaming capabilities, we'll be able to get on with the job. Also, the other thing that's happened recently, councillors, is that the Queen has passed away, and I was quite fortunate to represent the late Queen yesterday at a special commemorative service at the Cathedral of St George's Cathedral in the Perth CBD. Now, given I attended on behalf of the city and wrote a message in the condolence book across the road at Government House, I'll just read you out what I said in the condolence book. There was a lot to say and not a lot of space, but what I said was, to Her Majesty, in memory of a life of service and commitment, one of our lifetime's great leaders, Mayor David McMullen, on behalf of the City of Subiaco. So it was quite a special experience for me to be able to write in that condolence book and to attend yesterday's service, which was quite a fitting send-off for the people of Perth to give to the late Queen Elizabeth II. I noted the Governor in attendance, as well as 4 former governors, the Lord Mayor of Perth, the Chief Justice of Western Australia, the Leader of the WA Opposition. The Premier was not there, but he was represented by one of his ministers. And from what I could tell, it was a pretty large attendance for the cathedral. It looked like there was very little room left. Okay, there's a lot else going on, but I'll save that for next week's meeting. Let's get into the agenda items. Starting with C1, the Responsible Authority Report for 414 Rockby Road, Subiaco. Are there any questions about that agenda item? Councillor Kosovich.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My questions are to the report itself or the DA, and I'll read that as I've got two questions there. The first question is, the applicant states in the DA they are seeking some discretion to some provisions in the planning framework. However, upon closer reading of the DA, the discretion being sought appears to be extraordinary. My question is, what are the major concerns with these plans that have made it nigh and impossible to be approved by the city's planning department to this point of time? That's the first question. I'll wait for that response if I may, please.
Acting Director, Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the discretions are listed in the assessment table under Table 5 Key Planning Issues in the Responsible Authority Report. The elements of the design which seek the greatest discretion are linked to building height, setbacks, and the building height, the maximum building height on that site is 3 stories, and it's seeking this CA is seeking 6 stories. So there are also setback provisions, but and plot ratio provisions as well. However, they should all be read together in the assessment of the DA, and that's all detailed in Table 5.
Thank you, Mr. Petrosky. I appreciate that. I'm more for the benefit of the people watching from home as to what was contained in that. And the second question, if I may, please. This proposal has also been presented to the city's design review panel on 2 occasions. The first being November 2021, and the second being in February this year, 2022. On each occasion, the design review panel considered the request, but did not support it. Given, as I understand it, the extent of the variation sought, can I ask you to, 1, briefly describe the role of the design review panel in the planning process, and 2, can you elaborate on why this DA could not pass muster with the design review panel on 2 occasions, please?
Thank you, Councillor Kosovich, for your questions. I'll answer the first question and then refer the more detailed question to the Manager of Planning Services. So the reason why this is before the design review panel is that under our local planning scheme, we have included a provision which requires the design review panel to provide advice, and we need to give due regard to that advice when undertaking our assessment. So it's similar how you would assess something with other provisions in the local development plan or the R codes, for example. So the DRP have due regard weighting, and I'll let Anthony, Manager of Planning Services, provide more detail about the DRP's assessment in this instance.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Just a correction. So the applicant did seek this proposal to go to the design review panel in November and also February this year. The city considered their request at the time, but did not support that request given the extent of variation sought, and that's at the discretion of the city to do that. So what triggered the requirement to go to DRP, as Mr. Petrovski's pointed out, is that it is a DAP application, and we're obliged to put it to the design review panel. So the first time it was presented to the design review panel in May 2022, that was basically once the application had been submitted. As you can see in table 4, as demonstrated in the responsible authority report, the proposal received a number of pending further attention marks, one not supported for sustainability and only 2 green being supported. And then you can see the evolution of the design since then, which is very consistent with how DAs and that go through the design review panel tend to reflect, is that there's a general progression and evolution and development in that design. But there's some key concerns regarding landscape quality that haven't been addressed, built form and scale, regarding the height, sustainability, and also community. The other thing I would note is that the city did make a request to the applicant to present back to the design review panel as an offer. The applicant chose not to take that option up, and that's not uncommon, but that may be to do with their timing. But as is outlined in the responsible authority report, the proposal should be achieving design excellence in accordance with the planning framework, which it's not currently.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Look, I'd just like to firstly just take up on the point raised by Councillor Kosovic. Does that mean that out of the 10, I think it's 10 elements that they're judged on, that they only, by the DAP, that they only achieved 2?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So in table 4 in the responsible authority report, that outlines the DRP design quality evaluation. So in there is 6 design principles of the 10 that have achieved a level of support. There are 4 that are pending further attention, which, you know, as I mentioned before, it hasn't gone back to DRP to consider the plans that are in front of council for consideration. So if it does go back to DRP, that may change, but the city wasn't afforded the opportunity to present, and that is obviously a very time consuming process in terms of getting amended plans and reporting requirements in the context of the city submitting its responsible authority report.
Thank you very much for that. Look, I'm going to ask a question. I don't know really whether there's an answer to it, but the proposal by the applicant paints a very rosy picture, not surprisingly, and the RAR presents a very different picture. Now, you're both working by the same R codes, the same basic principles, but it's almost as if you could be talking about 2 entirely separate developments. I'm just wondering how you could be working under the same principles and there be such a discrepancy between what the proponent is saying and the assessment of what they're saying. As I say, I don't know whether you can answer that, but I just find it quite surprising.
Thanks, Councillor Powell, and through you, Matt. It's not uncommon for planners to have different sorts of opinions in considering a proposal. So the city's planners always seek to assess all proposals objectively in accordance with the information provided. But it isn't uncommon to have different opinions.
Right. Thank you. Look, I'll start with some of the more detailed questions then. And the first one involves the plot ratio. Now, the applicant is arguing that that essentially they cannot be prevented under the R codes from developing the block to its full potential, and its full potential would be a 6-storey building. And the council is saying, well, that's not correct. You know, under the LDP, it could only be developed, or under the Rockaby Road plan, it could local development plan, it can only be developed to 3. So the question is, how can really the proponent be stopped from going for 6 stories because that's their entitlement under the R code?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So the Rockaby Road South Local Development Plan was approved in May 2021, so it's quite a contemporary document. Traditionally, I guess, corner sites would normally be where you accommodate greater height, but in this case, during the, I guess, with the local context of that particular precinct, is quite a human scale where there's a lot of value in light penetration on those corner intersections. And that came out through the Urban Design Forum, which was a part of the community's involvement in the preparation of the local development plan. So all the intersections and the corner blocks basically have a lower height than what is contained within the mid blocks. So that this site, being a corner block, can have up to three stories. So it is quite consistent throughout the local development plan area that those heights exist. And the applicant is obviously seeking quite a lot, double essentially the height requirements, which we're saying is not consistent with the vision for the area, but that's what they're seeking to do.
Could I ask a question about the consultation process? Because I think the minister has made quite clear that she believes that the local consultation and local policy plans what are going to be giving the community confidence in the planning process. So how detailed was that consultation process? Because it would appear that will probably be a factor. So just a thumbnail of how we actually went about establishing that this was what the community wanted for this area.
Thanks, Councillor Powell. I can help out with that question. So when we were preparing the local development plan for Rockaby Road South, we held a 4-day urban design forum, and that had, I think over the day, about 55, 60 local community members, a mix of residents, businesses who attended the forum. So they set the scene in understanding the context of the area. And then we took the information that they provided to us through a series of walkthroughs and activities and turned that into a plan. The community shaped the plan and reversed the plan as well. So, well, not reversed the plan, but changed some of the height limits that we proposed. So instead of height limits being greater on the corners as the city initially proposed, the community were looking at really restricting the heights in the corners to 3 stories. So the Rockaby Road South local development plan was subject to thorough consultation. That was through preliminary engagement, council endorsement for advertising, and then a public consultation process, and then finally approved by council. So there's been thorough engagement in that process, and our hope is that that sets the scene for the types of development. It is up to any developer or applicant to submit whichever development application they like. However, it's always subject to assessment, and a decision maker needs to consider the planning framework which applies at the time.
Just on that, the applicant is also arguing that there's another 5-story building next door. There's a 6-story building going across the street, that it is consistent with that. But can you address the interface between this proposed building and the 5-story building next door? Because there seems to be something a little bit, it almost seems to be a void just from reading looking at the maps in one part of it. Am I correct about that? Is there a problem between the interface between the 2 buildings?
Yeah, I can probably answer that one. Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So the property to the east is a 5-story building. It's referenced in the Responsible Authority report that there is a separation where the 5-story element and what is now proposed as the 6-story building by this application. On that building next door, there is a 4-story element that the interface is. So I think that's maybe what you're referring to, Councillor Power, that it does drop down from 5 to 4, and then it's essentially going up to 6 should this be approved.
Okay, thank you. So that would create sort of an odd, potentially create an odd outlook from the street, not or an odd view from the street.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I mean, it's an inconsistent built form outcome compared to what is there.
Okay, just a couple of other questions. Overshadowing of the public realm of the palms. It appears that may be a problem. How much overshadowing of public open space may there be if this proposal gets the go-ahead?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So that the residential design code seeks to protect essentially residential coded property. So there's probably less guidance and preservation regarding and provisions associated with open space being overshadowed. That doesn't mean to say that it's not a good or a bad outcome, but the protections are more heavily geared towards residential type development.
Thank you very much. They're my main questions for the moment. Thank you.
Councillor White, I saw your hand up go up earlier. Was there a question?
I did have one, but Councillor Powell covered it, so I'm clear. Thank you.
Great. Any final questions about C1? Okay, we can move on to C2 then. Just a governance question before we do that. We've got 2 agenda items regarding the awarding of tenders. Are we treating one or both or none of them as confidential on the basis that we're talking about potential contracts? Maybe just some clarification about what we're doing with C2 and C5 as well, please. CEO or Director of Corporate Services, I suppose.
You going, Scott, or am I? So essentially, with the awarding of tenders, generally the majority of the information contained, so in C2, the majority of the information is public information. There is some commercially in confidence, in confidential attachments or other that you could go behind closed doors if there was detail that you needed to discuss. But in C2, most information is certainly open to the public. And likewise, with the newly issued report, that's actually a procurement through the CUA, and as such, most information can be or considered as public information, and therefore no need to go behind closed doors unless there's some commercial in confidence type question that's required.
Okay, first I probably should have asked if there are any questions about C2. Nope. Okay, it was all a moot point. C3, Evans Street to Keatley Road Safe Active Street Program, approval to proceed. I'm going to hazard a guess that's why the 2 viewers at home are watching this briefing, and Mr. Gorman from the Post would be watching in any case, so hello to the 3 viewers. Look, I'll go left to right as they appear on my screen. Councillor White, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, a couple of questions, and I suppose I'll do them just slowly one at a time. I guess what I'm interested, first of all, is what is the primary justification for this topic, for this recommendation and this approach? Is this because, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I understand there is a government grant that's providing support for this, which is very welcome. But prior to this, what level of community demand was there for this bike development?
That's the Acting Director Technical Services answering that, is it, Mr. Hambley?
Yep. Thank you.
Maybe just introduce your acting coordinator if you're getting any help with any of the questions tonight as well.
Yeah, so just for the viewers at home, joining us tonight is David Carter, the acting coordinator of Assets and Sustainability, who's also the project lead for this particular project. I'll just quickly answer your question, Councillor White, and if there's anything to add, Dave, by all means, chime in. So predominantly, the main driver for this project was the development of the city's bike plan. So the city's bike plan was developed just under 2 years ago. And a key outcome of that was identifying this as one of the high priority actions as far as this route, which is a key connector between Kings Park, the Shannon Park train station. Obviously, it connects, it runs adjacent to Lake Julbab, which is obviously a very well-used park. And also it's got a nearby Shannon Park Business District, and also Rosalie Primary. So there's a lot of activity centers and key nodes to link. It was identified through the community consultation that was used to inform the development of the bike plan, that this is a key route for cyclists and pedestrians, and that really was the catalyst for this project and the reason why we actually applied for it in the first place through the WABN grant, which we were successful in receiving to develop this concept design.
Sorry, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Can I just, for clarification though, when you say it was a key route, sorry, my lights have gone out. Do you mean that there's a demonstrable display of bikes that are already using that particular route and not others?
So it's really a bit of both. So and obviously based on feedback, and I'll refer to Dave because obviously he's involved in the bike plan as well, so he'd be able to speak to this a bit more soundly. But it was really a combination of both those users who currently use it for riding or the nearby area, but also those who would wish to, but maybe identify that maybe there's clear blockers, i.e. the speed of the streets or the treatments they're in that maybe inhibits them from using it as such. Did you want to add anything, David?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mayor McMullen. In terms of the consultation of the bike plan, we both identified this route through public feedback. It was raised on a few occasions, both through the open consultation and the working group that we had as being a viable route that would be encouraged as an alternative to the higher traffic routes that a lot of cyclists would use. And through our own consultation, well, our own feasibility study identification when we were first identifying this route, when we did make our own observations as well as our yearly cycling counts along certain aspects of this route, it was demonstrated that it did have a decent uptake. And given it had those connections as the Director of Technical Services identified, we sort of, saw that as sort of viable as an alternative route for those cyclists that may not be as confident, or families, young people, those sorts of cyclists. So yeah, it is a bit of both in that context.
Perhaps if I could just join the dots though, because we did the consultation and the bike plan, we were in a position to apply for a grant. Had we not had a bike plan, we wouldn't have been in a position to apply for this grant, would be my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. But in addition to that, there's also the long-term cycle network, which formed the basis of the bike plan, which initially identified half of that section, and then through the bike plan, we identified the remainder of that route as falling under the long-term cycle network.
Okay, thank you. The next question for me would be, obviously this treatment would then, dissuade cars from using that route to, as shortcuts or whatever it might be. Does it have the danger that it might shift that passing traffic onto other nearby roads instead? So that, in a sense, what we're doing is intensifying the problem elsewhere, should this happen in Nevin Street?
So you're quite right. This was a concern that was raised certainly in the first phase of consultation that was undertaken for this project. To be frank, I think the staff's opinion on that is it's unlikely to shift much traffic from the route. So Evans and Keatley. Keatley, for instance, obviously has very significant detour options. So traffic is already detoured through side streets. So what's proposed is unlikely to make any change to the current traffic that uses that. It's predominantly local traffic using the nearby properties. As far as further to the west, so along Excelsior and the Evans portion of the route, again, the volumes of traffic there are quite low, and would be indicative that it's predominantly for residential use. So most of the route has between 200 to 400 vehicles per day, which if you look at how many properties there and how many vehicles trips you'd expect in a given day, it's a close approximation that the majority of that is for local traffic. So there's not much through traffic there that would ideally be detoured to surrounding streets. So there's nothing to indicate there's rat runs that would be detoured through what we're proposing with this project.
James, if I could just clarify though, you're referring to the recommended option, which is the raised plateau, as opposed to the option B, the modal filter that would potentially change traffic in terms of more likely that they would seek an alternate route because they'd have to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so sorry, just thanks for the clarification, Colin. Yeah, so yeah, as far as the recommendation, staff recommendation, which has the raised plateau for the intersection of Evans and Fortune, that applies. Obviously, if the other option, which we've got within the options of this section of this report, that would definitely have some redirection of traffic for that western portion.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, what if other roads nearby in the area see this and like it and say, we'll have one of those too, please? Are we in a position to give them one?
I can probably add to that, thinking through you, Mayor McMullen. Similar sort of things have happened with some of the earlier safe active streets that were implemented, particularly the one in Shakespeare Street in Mount Hawthorn. Initially, that was a single route, and what you found there is that there has been some expansion of those similar treatments to the adjoining streets. So if we can demonstrate that this is successful and if it's warranted on those other streets, that is something we could, if it's identified as a priority either within the bike plan or it's shown as a more holistic benefit to extend to that, that's something we could consider. So given that a lot of these safe active streets were on the tail end of a pilot program under that grant, so in terms of the research that has been made as far as extending it to streets, it is limited as to how effective that will be at this stage. However, the early indications are that it is successful when expanding to other streets. We would just have to identify the need for that from, I guess, a broader road traffic perspective. To touch on that, given if this does get approved at council and we proceed to detailed design, part of that process is a peer review along with Main Roads of the concept design to feed into detailed design. That can also identify if there's any additional treatments to the adjoining roads that are required based on these treatments. So there may be some further discussion going forward there, but I expect those would be relatively minor treatments, like changes to stop controls, additional line marking, that sort of thing at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, I think the officer's report acknowledges that really there's a difference between the Evans Street section of the safe active streets and the Keighley Road section. Now, down sort of by end, if you like, the Evans Street, I think there was a suggestion at one of the consultation sessions from staff that they might actually be able to provide a breakdown of the Evans, Morgan, Onslow, Wayland Street, who was actually in favour of it, who was, just percentages, and who was against it, sort of, so you could get a clear idea of, sort of the people who thought they were winners or losers. Was that done? And are those figures, is that assessment available?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. It was part of our assessment, and while it's not definitively published either in the attachments or the report, and that's more so due to a confidentiality reason, it was something that, to a level, we could ascertain the broader locations as to where they're from. In terms of the feedback of that, it certainly wasn't simply a case of, for example, Evans Street wanted one particular treatment, Morgan Street wanted one particular thing. It was it was quite a range of that sort of feedback. Obviously, people who responded were broadly responding to their particular locale, and they were quite clear in their feedback as to where they were based or what particular aspect they were commenting on. So while the specific number breakdown is not provided in those attachments, it did form part of the assessment when we were looking at the qualitative and quantitative feedback and compiling that.
And can you give me some indication of what the result of that local assessment was?
Do you mean in terms of what the feedback was from the particular streets? I would say, as far as Evans Street went, because the point of contention in that section was that treatment at the Evans Street and Fortune Street intersection. It was probably an even split of Evans Street and Fortune Street residents within that locale that either supported the filter or supported the raised plateau, because it wasn't just a case of all Evans Street residents supported the filtered treatment, which was the non-recommended option in the report. Some of them had preference for the raised plateau because it made access easier for them. Morgan Street residents, some of them, in terms of the qualitative data, the majority of them only supported the raised plateau or did not support the proposal at all. Others, in terms of their feedback, didn't support the proposal. However, they were raising broader concerns beyond the treatment itself. A lot of that discussion fell back to the rezoning issues and the planning issues that they felt were a bigger impact and that this proposal was tied into. So yeah, it's hard to say a specific breakdown of each street and each preference for each street because it wasn't that clear cut.
How clear was it that doing nothing was also an option, and how much? I realise that there's a breakdown in the figures, but that's why I'm asking about the individual streets. Is there any particular areas that said no? Look, we just don't want anything at all.
There were some broader ones that weren't actually on the route themselves, but they were away from the route that did not support it. As I said, there was probably a stronger lack of support from those residents in the Morgan Street and those adjoining streets. There were also some other residents that were in those areas or other areas within the precinct that we notified that were quite indifferent about it and just said this is not something that will affect me, so I don't want to comment on it. So they were the general trends in that sense. I would say Keatley Road and Excelsior Street were broadly more supportive overall. However, there were still people there that also didn't support it.
Okay. You just mentioned, or in response to Councillor White, you said that there may be future road treatments at some stage in the other streets adjacent to Evans Street. Should there be sort of more of a master plan of what you're going to do first before you actually do it on one street, or is it you do one street and then you wait and see what the effects are? I'm just asking about whether there should be a more holistic approach in saying, well, look, what are we going to do about the whole area and then plan it?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. The intent of the project, as it's stated, is a safe, active street. So the intent of that is to provide a route, that provides a safe street for a range of road users to access these areas. That route was identified based on its connections, and I think when you're talking about a precinct-wide treatment, typically we look at those, you know, as a result of addressing a problem that exists, whereas this proposal did not emerge due to solving a problem necessarily that exists in that area. It's to provide an opportunity for that sort of route. If it's successful, then we can consider whether that will be viable on those other routes. Because as we provided in this last round of consultation, there was a lot of additional detail provided to residents on the traffic volumes and the speed volumes. And aside from some small locations there, it demonstrated that there wasn't, you know, a major traffic volume issue or a speeding issue throughout that area of the precinct. So yeah, you know, if this was a case of something where there was like a major issue throughout that area, then providing a broader holistic master plan would be viable. However, just based on the intent of this project and how it's emerged in the bike plan and the intent of Safe Active Streets as a whole as it currently stands, it's more appropriate to deliver it as a route rather than a broader neighbourhood treatment.
And I might just quickly add that that obviously we've got two options here, and like Colin was stressing, there is a fair difference, particularly between the two options. Obviously, the staff recommendation would have the raised plateau at the intersection of Evans and Fortune. Like I've said, that's unlikely to cause, and we don't expect, and certainly it's not the history of similar sort of treatments throughout the city that have been implemented over the last 20 years, that's going to cause a significant rerouting of traffic, which was a very strong concern of community members, certainly in the first phase of consultation. And obviously, I think that's since lowered after further discussions about the matter. Where additional treatments for surrounding streets possibly is viable is where you have that stronger option, if you will, whereby you have the modal filter on that intersection. And that's for the very reason why we've recommended that it would be trialed first, so you could ascertain the likely impact on the surrounding streets. And if further treatments were required, particularly to address rerouting of traffic into the side streets, which was one of the primary concerns that was first had, we could identify it in that trial and make it adjustments to the final detailed design to cater for that wider precinct if it was required.
Okay. You also mentioned that, you know, sort of Evans Street had been chosen because it provided good access to a number of other areas. Take, for example, if somebody's going to the hospital, they may use that bike route from the train station. But how do they actually connect up with the bike routes that run down Aberdare Road or the other bike routes? How does this bike route actually connect up with anything except the bike route down the Kings Park?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mayor McMullen, a lot of that is addressed in the bike plan in terms of other projects. So, and also if you viewed the long-term cycle network as well, that identifies some of those local routes that provide that connection through there. So there are further actions in the bike plan that, you know, like high-level actions that we can investigate what the best connections are. Part of the issue with Aberdare Road is that there's still a lot of uncertainty as to the future of what interventions are going to occur there, particularly around the expansion of QE2 and the work that they're doing in terms of the infrastructure plans. So, you know, it's essentially, you know, once we know what those further connections will be, then, you know, we can further define what those treatments might be within the context of the bike plan.
This is a very sort of detailed question, but are there going to be any parking spaces lost? And if so, how many?
On Keatley Road, there's some build outs being proposed. There's a total of 5 build outs along the edges of the road to have like a shortened narrowing of it to maintain that 30k an hour for vehicle traffic. So where those are being placed, that would likely lose a street parking bay in those locations. There are some much smaller build outs on Excelsior for a similar purpose. But they're much smaller than a parking bay as currently proposed in the plan. So in total, that may be, you know, 1 or 2 bays based on where they're placed. Evans Street, there isn't any specific proposal to reduce parking. However, there are locations where there's a speed bump. So practically speaking, there'll probably be a loss of parking in that location. But you know, overall, we sought to maintain street parking wherever possible because that also helps to serve for traffic calming throughout the route.
And this may be a little bit left of centre, but is it, well, I'll ask a question first. Is it quite legal for cyclists to use laneways as methods of getting, you know, from point A to point B? You know, is there any problem with them using laneways?
No.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the reason for the question is, was any consideration given to using because there are quite a number of laneways in the Evans Morgan Street area. I'm just wondering whether there was any consideration given to using those, you know, to take the cycle traffic completely off the main off the local roads.
It's something that we looked at more broadly, not as part of this project or not directly as part of the bike plan, but previously we were looking at a laneway strategy and identifying the uses through that. Well, there's nothing legally preventing cyclists from using public laneways, given the varied nature of our laneways and the varied widths of those. It's not something that we could consistently encourage as a dedicated cycle route as opposed to roads and public spaces. And it does take a lot of cyclists away from a direct route. And it is also limited in terms of wayfinding, given the way that they're currently named as well.
Look, I'll try and wrap it up with a few more questions, but what about going through Lake Julbup? There have been a number of people who've suggested that, you know, perhaps rather than taking it along Evans Street further, that a safer method would have just been taking it through, you know, through the public park, of Lake Julbup.
Yeah, that was considered at the feasibility study stage as a potential route. There were some issues identified in terms of whether that would end up being a shared path or a separate path. And then given it's an Indigenous heritage site, there were some issues there in terms of seeking approvals that I think it was identified as somewhat challenging in terms of obtaining that approval at that time.
Were all the traffic studies, traffic volume studies done at the same time? So was it comparing apples with apples, or?
The traffic study on the route itself was done at the same time. The adjacent streets were done at a different time. The reason why we didn't do a collective study of the route and those adjacent streets at that second time that we were obtaining the data is that the purpose of gathering the traffic data at the on the other streets was to identify if there were any existing traffic problems on those streets, rather than comparing the volumes of those streets because of how low they are and how you know, consistent the traffic speeds are. It wasn't seen as relevant to, you know, just to compare them at the same time, because it wasn't about picking one over the other. It was just about seeing whether there were any further issues to identify for those adjacent streets that we need to consider as part of this.
Look, probably a fairly obvious question. How much is the council putting into this compared with the state government?
It's a 50-50 split between the state government and the city up to a certain amount. So as far as this concept design stage has gone, it is the state government provided $25,000. So that would be a total project cost of $50,000. However, we are currently well below that for this stage. For the next stage, we've got a provisional approval for funding depending on the council decision next week. And that's a provision of $60,000 for the detailed design of Department of Transport funding, and then that will be a 50-50. And if there's any cost increases over that, that's the responsibility of the city to cover.
And this is almost, the reason why I asked that is it's almost going back to my an original question. I think that if the state government's kicking in half and we're putting in half, how are the neighbouring streets, if they do face problems, is the council going to be able to fund it by itself? Because as a matter of equity, you know, is the council going to be able to come up with the money without state government assistance, or will we be looking for state government assistance with that as well?
Mayor McMullen, yes, the city would be in a position. We do have an allocation in our capital works program for local area traffic management. So if we were to find that in the unlikely situation that one of the side streets had a significant issue with rerouting of traffic or speeding of vehicles or the like, we have funds available each that's in our long-term financial plan that's set aside for these very type of projects. So we would have the capacity if that were to be the case.
And one very final question. A 30-kilometre speed limit, will the traffic calming treatments achieve that, or is it going to need to be policed as well in some way to make sure that traffic does obey those restrictions?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, there are design standards for, given that the majority of the treatments will be raised plateaus based on the officer recommended plan. There are design standards for achieving certain speed reductions through that. We will obviously monitor after implementation to ensure that's being achieved, but based on the designs from the consultants that have worked on a range of these previously, that will be the intent of the treatments there.
I thank staff very much for their time and the other councillors for their patience.
Thank you.
Councillor De Vries.
Yes, thank you. Through you, can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah, through you, Mayor McMullen. This is for the Acting Director of Technical Services. I think actually Councillor Powell managed to cover most questions. Thank you, Councillor Powell. But I have a couple of follow-up questions which relate to the risk and asset implications in the report. And obviously, we've just talked about the funding, and you've mentioned in the report that if we don't take this offer up, we risk losing the funding, and we also possibly risk losing future funding. For a start, could you tell me how that works? That just seems a bit concerning that we would put ourselves at risk of losing future funding. And are there other opportunities for funding for projects like this? That's my first question. Also, obviously, I think, and I think expanding on projects like this would obviously become more imperative with the increase of e-bikes. And I notice in the area I live in, there is quite a considerable increase in the amount of traffic on the streets around me in terms of e-bike usage. So obviously, this is something that might be needed to be looked at in the way we approach this. The second question I've got, so I won't have to repeat myself, is relating to the signage and markings. Obviously, 30-kilometre speed limit really changes how people drive, and just having those speed signs up makes a huge difference. Is it possible to have in the surrounding streets that don't have the traffic calming measures, would it be possible to have the 30-kilometre speed signs in place as a way to discourage cars from zooming around the corners and suddenly having to go down to 30, because that's another thing which I've noticed in the street I live in, that people come down Stubbs Terrace, rip around the corner, and it's just a really easy mistake to make. So is it possible to be consistent in that safe active streets area, or if not, why not? Thank you.
Perhaps I might answer the first question, if it's all right, through Mr. Mayor, in terms of funding. I suppose my view to funding is always around, the council should determine whether or not it's appropriate to do a treatment that is going to give greater access potentially to a multitude of users. So that's what's before you. Does this make sense to do this project? And does that give a safer street for a range of other activities, not just bikes as you've described, e-scooters, etc., and how the world is changing, well, particularly Perth, in how we move about the place. The second thing is there is funding, because we've done these studies in the past, and at each step, so the next step is to go to detailed design. If council wish to, we'd be able to access that 50%. And likewise, if council wish to proceed to the actual construction, the 50% as well. So, and that's only available for the time that the program is up and running. So that's the extent to which I suppose is at risk. It's always subject to state government determining that they wish to half fund these types of arrangements. But if council decided not to proceed, well, obviously we wouldn't have access to the funding to implement this, and that's entirely council's decision. But so that's the only thing at risk, I suppose, in terms of proceeding to the next stage, is that you don't have access and you don't make this treatment if council determine not to proceed. But it doesn't impact on other funding opportunities, because council have the right to determine whether they wish to proceed or not to proceed. So that would be my answer, but I'm happy to be quiet now and let James or Chris talk, because I think he's off mute, so I'll hand over.
Yep. No, I think that covers the comment as far as the first question, Councillor De Vries. As far as your second, that's definitely something that would be, as David's alluded to, we'd have to work out with Main Roads as far as treatments on the approach to those side streets, because absolutely it's going to be quite a different road environment, a different speed limit. So there'll definitely be appropriate signage on the approaches from the side roads, and obviously there's a fairly established way that's done with similar sort of treatments being done elsewhere in Perth. So that's likely what's going to happen here. So there'll be likely additional signage on the side approaches, and particularly at the start, if we were to proceed at the time of implementation, you'd obviously have probably additional signage and other things just to help get the users of that road environment, which majority would be local traffic, just familiar with the environment.
Thank you. I just have one further question, if that's okay, through you, Mayor McMullen. Sure. Again, in the risk and asset implications, you mentioned the importance for asset replacement, and that would be something which I don't see in the costing. What would you envisage the asset replacement the cost likely to be, and how much funding do you think we could get to support asset replacement? And is that something that would be impacted by the Safe Active Streets program, or just something that's ongoing, not related to the Safe Active Streets program that we're implementing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your amendment. So what that really alludes to is obviously with a lot of our assets, and particularly interrelated assets, we try and coordinate work. So if we were to proceed with this project, obviously that's the ideal time to upgrade, for instance, street lighting. If you're adjusting curb lines or doing resurfacing, that's also the most suitable and the cost-effective time to do modifications to drainage on the side of the road. So that's what that's alluding to, that we try and coordinate scheduled works to coincide with this grant funding. So you would be able to make use of grant funding where if you're resurfacing a portion of the road, you might be able to upgrade the nearby drainage pit. It's the most cost-effective time to do such a thing.
And if I could add as well, it's also the least disruption to the community, given that you've got to put traffic management, etc., in place. So it's you try and avoid the triple play of Water Corporation, us and Western Power all doing things at different times. So that's the intention behind that, is not only is it cost saving, but also try and minimise the disruption to residents.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. I would like to first have a better understanding of the loss of parking amenity. I couldn't, it wasn't clear to me in the report. Is it in an attachment or something? And I just want to know, are the residents who are potentially going to lose parking outside of their place because of the design or the speed lumps or the speed bumps or the traffic coming, are they aware that they will be impacted in that way? And I'm quite happy if this comes to us. In fact, I'd prefer it if this came by email during the week, because it might take you a little bit to sort of work out. So I'd appreciate that. So I'll park that. But if we could have that information before the next meeting. And the next thing is, I just want to understand all this funding a little bit better. So looking at page 15 under financial, we've got DOT has approved up to 60,000 of the grant funding to complete the detailed design stage. So does that effectively cover it, or is that covering only 50% of doing all that detailed design? That's my first question. Thanks.
So it covers, so it's a 60,000 allocation towards the detailed design, which would get us to a point where we have all the plans and designs that we are able to construct the project. And if this were to be endorsed next week, we'd envision that this could be done within this financial year.
Okay, and $60,000 would cover that. We're not going to be out of pocket.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add to that to clarify. Thank you through Mayor McMullen. It is basically $60,000 up to 50% of the total project cost. So, for example, if the detailed design only cost $100,000 in total, we would receive $50,000 of that $60,000. So they're the two parameters. It's the amount that they approve as part of the grant agreement contract, up to 50%, because there's milestones we deliver and we receive portions of that funding as we reach those milestones. So yeah, they're the two parameters in that. And anything
likewise, if it was 130,000, we would need to pay the additional 10.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Now I get it. And then moving on to, this is a over $500,000 project. The total cost being between 517 and 524,000 plus a few extra hundred. And so we're pretty comfortable that they would come to 50% of that cost. That would be only out of pocket of, say, $260,000, because it's just said if the city proceeds to construction, would seek further WABN funding, which could cover up to 50%. So, you know, how guaranteed is that 50% of over $500,000?
There's no guarantees. The WABN grant is quite a well-subscribed grant stream. And as far as the overall grants pool that's available, it's quite small as opposed to some other funding streams that are available to the city, certainly for infrastructure projects. What would put us in good stead is obviously we've been successful in the first stage of funding for the concept design, which obviously we're discussing tonight. And we've also secured funding for the concept design if we were to proceed with that. So we're basically, it's put us in as best stead as we could be to secure funding for the construction component. So while there's no guarantees, the fact that they've supported up to this point is quite heartening, and probably means we have the best chance at receiving that funding up to 50% of that construction cost.
And just to add to that, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. For some specifics, the Department of Transport just announced the next funding stages, which would be the ones that we would seek funding for construction. And there's a total of $8 million that they provide over that period for all local governments in Western Australia. It's essentially they will have that sort of limitation as to what they can provide depending on what the other projects are and where they sit. Given, like, if this does proceed to approval, and given that council approval is in place, that would tick a lot of the criteria in terms of them being confident to provide funding. So we've already ticked the criteria of what it delivers under their criteria for allowing funding. Yeah, this will be that additional next step for them to be confident in terms of delivery and providing that funding. So while like what was stated, we can't guarantee the exact amount at this stage. I would be confident that we could achieve that 50% based on that costing, based on, you know, provided that council endorses it going forward.
And just if I can add to that, it's obviously every financial year, so you may slightly miss out because your project sits beneath where the line is drawn, but then you may be eligible the following year. So there's opportunities multiple years.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through the chair. Look, I've got to make a quick comment in relation to the prospect or the hope that someone at home watching may think that we can use laneways as an alternative to roads or streets. That certainly sent off a red flag for me, because I think if you consult the Main Roads Department, it will be will not even be entertained. Drawing on my own experience of having attended many serious crashes and fatalities, putting cyclists down laneways, particularly after dark when they're dimly lit, and reversing cars, I don't think that's ever going to be an equation that would be entertained by the Main Roads Department. So just to, I think if you need to explore that with the Main Road Department, then please do that. But I thought I had to make that comment. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to take up Councillor Stroud's point, just to finish that off. Thank you for those questions, because I had exactly the same ones. And I'm just, I'm picking up that there wouldn't be any intention by the city to proceed without the funding. However, as drafted, the recommendation doesn't make that clear. And so I was wondering whether we could ask the staff to consider a recommendation that is good enough to trigger an understanding in the department that we are going to put up our 250,000, but we wouldn't go ahead alone. So that it's just on the public record that you know, we go proceed to detailed design and construction, you know, subject to receiving a 50% grant. That's my first question.
Obviously, that's completely at the discretion of council if they're of a mind to make an amendment to that effect. Probably the only thing I would note is within the long-term financial plan, there is allocations under our cycling budget in the capital works program that would cover this project over 2 years. So there is municipal funding available if we were to choose that, but absolutely it's at the council's discretion if they wanted to amend the resolution such that said we would proceed to construction if and when we received funding to cover up to 50%.
I might have a think about that and come back to you. It's just I'm conscious I don't want to flip in a thing that will then mess you up in terms of you said, or someone said earlier, you know, that it's important when you're applying for these grants that we are ready to go, and it's clear to them. So I wouldn't want to draft something that would not leave you in that best position to apply for the grant, whilst getting it on the public record that I don't know what the council would think, but my own initial gut feeling is that I'm not sure I'd be prepared to spend the money on what is, you know, it's a great, well, it's potentially a community benefit, but it's also a statewide benefit because it is designed to help people move through Subiaco more broadly, not just within the community. So anyway, we can do that during the week.
Respond to that, Councillor Hammersley. I think anytime council want to provide clarity in terms of priorities is a good thing. So if that is council's preferred method, that the funding, we do receive the funding because of it. It is a state government initiative as well, and state and local government partner well. So if that's what council thought was appropriate, that would be entirely appropriate.
Yeah, I think the message I'm getting is though that it would be best if any councillor thinks that's an amendment worth debating, we'll put up an amendment, but I think I probably will do that, and I'll come to the staff and ask for assistance in drafting it in a way that is not cutting across your best efforts to get the grant. So that's that. So that was my first question. The second one was, we've just had the experience of doing some raised plateaus in Nicholson Road where it was able to be designed in a way that the plateaus are there, but the parking wasn't affected. So I presume that would be looked at to try and minimise parking interruptions. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor, that's fair. We'll absolutely try and minimise the loss of parking, acknowledging concerns. That'd be that's one of the main concerns that residents would have.
Yes, great. And something else. I think that's it. Thank you.
Look, I'll just ask a question before we move on, and I apologise if it appears as I haven't read the papers closely enough, but I just want to be abundantly clear about what the, I suppose, the traffic engineering advice on this is. Are we reasonably comfortable that there's going to be no rat runs created by the concept design, or is there going to be a small amount of diversion of traffic, but the amount would be negligible? I just want to be really clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that. So to be perfectly clear, we've done similar such treatments in the past. We've done similar such treatments for probably the last 20 to 25 years in Subiaco. And obviously we've got quite thorough assessments of the traffic before and after. And I don't believe any of them have actually indicated a significant redirection of traffic to surrounding streets, because while we expect they'll bring down the speeds to the desired, which would be about 30 k's, often it's not enough to discourage people from using those routes, particularly acknowledging the majority of traffic is locals who have, in a lot of cases, no real alternative to those streets, and there's not much through traffic going through them.
Okay, and just a follow-up question. If we take the officer advice and we favour option A over option B, there's not going to be any physical diversion of traffic. The driver experience is a bit hard to envisage when you're looking at a plan of these types of things. Is it going to be a frustrating experience when one drives down Evans Street? because I think that's the common criticism that these types of works attract. And I'm very conscious of, I think it's an active open street that's being put in town of Cambridge, actually along Ruislip Street, and that might have even been in the post a few weeks back. But yeah, you often hear a lot of tutting at the impact that these types of works can have on the driver experience, and I appreciate that that's part of the point of the Active Open Streets program, is to slow people down. But will it become an undesirable experience to drive down Evans Street as a result of these works?
It's an interesting question to answer. I wouldn't go as far as to say undesirable. I mean, as you'd appreciate, particularly given the environment, particularly around the park there, with a combination of existing parking, obviously it's quite an active use. So throughout the majority of the day, you would have, we've got the traffic counts to show that you do already have the speeds close to our target speed already. So the experience as far as travel time and the speeds won't be hugely different from the current situation for most traffic that travels along the road during the usual hours. Probably what would be the most noticeable would be for those vehicles that maybe travel out of hours where it's not so active and there's not so many vehicles parked in the street, whereby they might try and travel at a greater speed. It's probably those vehicles that will probably have find the most noticeable difference as far as where most traffic travels about 40 to 30 Ks for some of these areas, which is is the design intent. It'd be those vehicles traveling probably later hours, trying to travel at high speeds would probably notice it. So the majority of traffic would not find a big difference.
I think if I could probably add, I find it really annoying driving down Hay Street, but I know I have no alternative. So generally it's the change that probably creates the greatest challenge for the motorists of the area, but once it's in place, you know, there's no alternative, so you continue down that path.
And just if I could add, part of the majority of the choice in treatments along this route, when you're talking about large raised plateaus and those build outs, the large raised plateaus don't have the same sort of discomfort impact as a more focused speed hump. And that's important when you're designing them to achieve 30K as well. So I wouldn't imagine there being any sort of significant, major discomfort on those treatments as a result of that. And those build outs along Keatley Road essentially serve the purpose of a permanently parked car. So it's essentially about just ensuring there's that maintained road environment that the street parking already achieves. That's already on there. Those sorts of things are done in that intent. So it's not that significant a disruption for the existing drivers that do have to use that route.
We'll call it calculated inconvenience then. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, I'm just seeking really a point of clarification. It almost goes back to the start of the discussion about why we're doing this. And I think when that question was asked initially, it was because it was part of the bicycle plan, because it provided good connection, et cetera, et cetera. But am I hearing now that if we didn't get state government money, we wouldn't be doing it? Is it because state government money is on the table that is quite a significant factor in this decision?
No, I think my response was if council wished to provide that clarity on the proposed funding. Director also explained that the long-term financial plan was able to accommodate this treatment if council wished to proceed without that funding. Ideally, receiving state government funding on any project is a benefit because that reduces the impact on the ratepayer. So at any time we're able to attract state government funding for a program that would improve the use of other users other than just vehicles. And that's why this program is about. So that was the clarification that I was providing in terms of if council wished to provide clarity on the ideal funding for this particular project. But certainly seeking 50% funding is beneficial for the ratepayer.
So I think you're making clear that it is not a determining factor. It's not something upon which sort of the decision should be based, really.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if council wish to provide clarity around how they believe it should be funded, that's fine. What we're saying is, as officers and the engineers have put the information in to articulate they believe this is a good road treatment to achieve those outcomes as described in this program, and we would continue to say that and recommend that if the funding weren't available. So the recommendation remains this is the best treatment we believe, given the feedback that we've received from the residents, to achieve the objectives that are set out in the bike plan, as well as this particular program.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Yeah, this has just arisen, two more questions arisen out of things that have just been said. I picked up that the build outs are designed to assist with the slowing of the traffic and almost like a permanently parked car. So I was just wondering, can build outs be designed to allow parking on them even though they're a build out?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. That was, interestingly enough, a question that was asked during the consultation with a resident. The issue with that is if they're built to such a low profile, like part of the intent is to also provide vegetation in these build outs, but if they're built to such a low profile and paved, they are severely limited in terms of serving that purpose, because a lot of vehicles could drive over them. And at night there's a potential risk there. So it's not really something we've considered as part of that proposal.
Okay, thank you. And just using Evans Street as an example, it's probably in the report somewhere, but do you know offhand how many speed plateaus would be involved in going from one end of Evans Street to the other?
Yes, in terms of if you're talking Evans Street from Railway all the way to Excelsior, I believe it will be 5 in total, based on option A. So at Fortune Street, there will be one at, sorry if I can just get the right page. So yes, Fortune Street, King Street, Herbert Road, Centre Street and Excelsior Street.
Okay, and do you know offhand how many metres that is, that distance?
They're different for each intersection as currently proposed.
No, the total, that total street.
Oh, that total street. Off the top of my head, I believe it's just, I think Keighley Road is just over a kilometre, Keighley and Excelsior. So I think it's around that sort of 800 metre mark.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just measuring now. So Evans is 750 meters long.
Right, thank you. That's it. Thank you.
It looks like there's no more questions on C3. So let's move on to C4, financial statements and reports for the month ending 31 July. Any questions on that item? Nope. Okay, so there was a paper submitted today for a new item C5, which I don't think will appear on the version of the agenda that was circulated prior to tonight's briefing publicly, but I'm happy to take questions on C5. It's for the awarding of a tender for the provision of Microsoft 365 licensing. Any questions if anyone's had a chance to read the report? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. One question in relation to the licenses. And I think it says there's a certain volume of licensing the money will provide, or the fee will provide over the 3-year period. Do we have a finite number of licenses in that? Is there a chance we may not have enough licenses, or is there a specific number? Please.
Manager Information Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The way the licensing works is you have a guaranteed number over the lifetime of the contract, the 3 years. And then you have some other licenses that you can basically pay for on a month-to-month basis. So basically, say we purchasing 220 licenses, for example, underneath the enterprise agreement, then we could have, we cannot go under that limit. We can raise that limit at any time, but we can't go under that limit during the term of the contract. And then we have some additional ones, I think about 16 or so that are floating ones that we actually can remove over the time. So we can add and remove those monthly ones as we go.
Without any financial penalty, it's still the same amount.
Still the same amount. The financial penalty comes under that. If you've got the existing 200 odd licenses that are under the enterprise agreement, they're obviously cheaper because they're under a contract for the 3 years than the month-to-month licenses.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're on mute, David.
So I am. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the reports for discussion this evening. There will be at least one confidential item next week. So what we'll do now is we'll close the agenda briefing forum and we'll move on to the other business that we need to cover as a council. But what I'll do now is I'll close the briefing. So I declare the council agenda briefing forum of the 20th of September 2022 closed at 7:04 p.m. Thanks, councillors and staff. And as alluded to, if you're staying on for the workshop tonight, then just stay logged in, I suppose. Thanks, everyone.